Right. So, why people seem to want to gravitate towards negative content? Got a few notes here, no particular order, kind of bullet pointy. So, number one, people like negative content. Makes them feel better about themselves. It's a form of distraction. So, in a funny kind of way, this sort of negative content is actually felt in a sort of positive manner, even though it might not be constructive or productive. If it's to facilitate anger in particular, like an angry state, then this could lead to bad decisions and escalation. And some of the other points will kind of tie into the emotional intensity. So number two, all right, so if negative content is seen as a positive, then conversely, positive content makes them feel bad. It doesn't have the same kind of dopamine reward. Positive content in the sense of like maybe self-development, introspection, self-reflection, having to look within. That is harder work. That is daunting stuff. So people are naturally kind of avoidant of things that they are sensitive to, maybe insecure about, things that opens them up and makes them exposed. So it's avoided, unfortunately. It's like the bad taste in medicine. People don't really like to have to take it. Okay, next point. So as a result, in a way, if there is a problem with regulating one's emotions, then the negative content as a sort of form of coping, unfortunately, helps to stabilize the situation, the emotions, and so they don't have to. So there's another sort of mechanical reasoning why negative content is drawn upon as a form of regulating. This isn't about good or bad, it's about the functionality of it. So even if it's regulating it in a sort of bad way, it's doing harm, it's making matters worse in the long run, that's neither here nor there in a way. The point is that at least it's being stabilized to stop with the roller coaster of ups and downs. So point number sort of 3, negative content can appear to be cool. It's like peacocking, to have wit and puns and whatever. So it's a form of social currency. If your peers are doing it, why not I, kind of thing. And so you fit into the group better. You want to belong, and you might believe that this is what you're supposed to do, that this is the norm, this is socially acceptable and the way to go about doing things. Everyone else is doing it. They don't see any problems. So unsuspecting, what is the harm being done? Right, carrying on. Number 4, survival. Information is security, is power. So on a sort of I need to know this kind of basis, and knowing how others feel and what they're noticing keeps you up to date. It keeps you one step ahead, not necessarily one step ahead, but it keeps you at the front of the information arms race, as it were, sort of thing. And if you know how other people's have fallen, it helps you not to fall as well. So we learn from people's mistakes. And consequently, the thing is, people might not necessarily know what is good, because things that are good tend to be sort of like delayed gratification. It takes a bit of like investment and time, duration. Whereas to see things that are bad is a lot quicker and instantaneous. So if you have trouble to know what's good, then the shortcut way of finding that out is to watch what's bad and do the sort of opposite or whatever. Because you might not know what is a good woman then in this sort of sense. Well, just look at all the bad things they do, and there you go. You're off to a good start. And if you're not on the ball with this information, you feel like you're being left behind, makes you feel like you're at a disadvantage, and that makes you feel vulnerable and weak and so on, and susceptible to being taken advantage of. So there is a incentive to want to know or to go towards negative content. You can kind of rationalize a productivity out of it. All right, next point. The drama creates adrenaline. And with all these emotions everywhere, there is quite a rush associated with it. And people can become junkies, unfortunately, to it. So you're hooked on the adrenaline, the dopamine, the endorphins, and whatever other chemicals and hormones. And these give messages to your brain that this is important for you. So it should carry on. You should persist. You shouldn't limit it. So we see people kind of overindulging more than they should. They already know what they need to know, but they can't have enough. There's no limits. They're insatiable. They need to know more. And it's been fueled by the adrenaline and all that sort of stuff. And they're hooked. So they're addicted they become addicted to the negative content. You're not really going to become addicted to the positive content, because that is looked at more as sort of hard work. I mean, how many of you, well, I suppose some people might be addicted like workaholics, but you're more reliant on things that you're more dependent. So there's another sort of aspect of there forms a dependency on the negative content. If you've got people who are already codependent or have dependency issues, and that's been severed, they're no longer with those people, well, that doesn't really remove their dependence. They find other means, alternatives to tie their addictions to. So next point, negative content is alluring, it's tantalizing, it's rewatchable. And in a sick sort of way, it's a bit like a joke. It's a setup for a joke. Here it comes. Here comes the punchline. So there's this anticipation, and that adds a little bit of sort of value. It's like, stay tuned. It's gonna, the reward is gonna come, and dare I say it, maybe even sort of orgasmic. The climactics punchline of they got what's coming. All right, so number 8, here the more intricate reasoning. So the negative content, how does it manage to hook and captivate its viewer? Well, it hijacks through your empathy. That's just one of the ways. But the empathy serves as a conduit, because you can imagine and feel what the other person is experiencing, and you do so with the safety of not being them. So your curiosity of what would it be like to fuck up can be fulfilled without you actually having to risk anything. And again, it's like learning from other people's mistakes. And that's why we watch things like bloopers and blunders. And when there's a car accident, you kind of rub a neck. And when someone hurts himself, you sort of go, ooh, you wince. And, you can kind of feel what it's like. There is actually a bit of science there where the same areas of your brain actually activate. So in a way, it's not just like your imagination, but it is to some degree a actual a real experience. You do really kind of feel their pain because that part of your brain is activated. If you want to know more about that, look it up. I don't know what you'd have to type in. All right, next point. So if we have people who are in need of developing, shall we say, there's probably an issue of poor boundaries. And then this becomes the difference between just pointing something out, like keeping you up to date with some info, not necessarily at the pinnacle of info, but just like FYI, keeping your ear to the ground. But this is the poor boundaries is meant to prevent. Well, boundaries are supposed to prevent it from going into excess. So if you've got poor boundaries, there is no stopping it, and now you're going into far more of an excess, knowing more than you need to know. And if you were to not fall into this trap, you're going to need that conscious awareness of being like, whoa, okay, stop, no. So if people are not consciously aware of what they're not mindful of what they're feeding into them, what they're allowing themselves to be exposed to, then perhaps when they eventually do realize, like, what have I been doing all week? I've been doing nothing but watching negative content, then it might dawn on them, but by which point it's probably a bit too late. Now you're going to have to reel it back in. And this is unfortunately maybe the humility part of things, where we're not, as a community, we're not as intricate with where we place our no's. Like, we'll say no to this, no cohabitation, no whatever, no marriage, no kids and things like that, but we won't say no to a bombardment of negative content. If anything, we're saying, yes, please give me more. So there needs to be a level of discipline, and this couples in with the mindfulness, discipline, some responsibility to your self-care, because obviously what we're describing here, it's harming you. It's not actually good for you. Angela, I see you're here. Great to see you, sir. Who else is it? JR, did I say hi to you? Mr. Hemmy's here. Iridium is here, and Carl. Great. Okay. Carrying on. And with neglect, you're not doing your diligence, what will happen? You become complacent. And it shouldn't be a surprise you become complacent, because you're not looking after yourself. It's the negative content which is looking after you. I put a point here. I'm not sure why I put it in here, but it says it doesn't help being told, don't forget to take those red pills. I wrote that there. I must have wrote that there because that must be some sort of a problematic statement of being constantly reminded to take your red pills. Maybe along the lines of maybe because like you could end up overdosing. So maybe the advice should be only take those pills when you need them. And it doesn't please me to say, but it should be evident, really, that along with this sort of behavior, it results in, well, it doesn't result, it comes from unhealthy behaviors, and makes things worse. So the empathy has been corrupted. It empties a person out, makes them more shallow and hollow. and unfortunately they probably believe that they have morals and it's self-serving and self-righteous, and because they can't see, they haven't got the perspective to see what they're doing. If the negative content is like pointing the finger of shame, like look how bad and crap they are. Well, if they are crap, then I must be good, which is a bit of like slave morality, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly. So it's the focus is externalized in an unbalanced way, because to introspect is painful. So it's like black and white thinking, all good, all bad. They are all bad. And unfortunately, with how things are shaping out with people's observations, it's, you know, following the psychological kind of literature with the path to self-destruction, the spiraling of decay and dysfunctionality, then even if you were trying not to think of them as being all bad, that's the direction they're heading for, really. So they're not far from it. So you can't really be blamed for maybe seeing them in black and white thinking. Just try not to juxtapose yourself as uber virtuous and purity in all its forms. A more sickly point to make is, if this is going beyond acceptable levels and there is the addiction aspects are factored in and it's making you feel good, then we could be looking at bits of sadism forming, where people start to enjoy watching other people get hurt, broken, embarrassed, and they'll call this karma, and I don't believe karma is exactly I think that's a selfish extension of your own power. I think it's a bit grandiose to think that karma is going to work in your favor. I think consequences, more simply put, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. It's not really karma, it's consequence. And this can also not only just make someone feel better, but makes them feel powerful, because in a way their karma was like an extension. It's like God was watching their handiwork, and they've smited down the loser, and they had a part to play in it. So that will then tie in with a bit of entitlement, because if this is your justice, then you might feel like you have a right to see, and you are owed to see the outcome of their suffering. Really, what the advice when it comes in terms of narcissistic community spaces is, what happens to them, be it karma or consequence or whatever, really, you don't want to know. You can theoretically know, if you must have that kind of curiosity or reassurance, is theoretically it's not going to be good. You don't need to witness it, because the idea is to get away from it. And if you're peeking at what's happening, then you are still, to some degree, even though you might say you hate them, you are still bound to them. And especially if you're tying your happiness to them, it's like I need to see them get there. I need to see. I need to be vindicated or get some justice, because otherwise I am not allowed to feel good about myself. So even though you might say you don't like them, you hate them, and things like that, you are still expecting them to be responsible for your happiness. And so really the better way is just to not even think about them. It's irrelevant, be indifferent. It's beyond just ghosting. It's they do not exist. It's irrelevant. So to a point where you're oblivious to what's happened to them. Okay, so next point is the negative things, the drama and all that creates a shock. The shock factor, disgust, and that's a form of fuel, unfortunately. And it's not just the individual watching who gets that jolt of that spike in energy from the shock factor, but they also gauge it from other people's reactions watching. So it's one thing if you're an individual watching negative content, but if there's a group of you together watching negative content, then you can kind of feed off each other and gauge from each other their reactions. And so it becomes a soup of emotional fuel for everybody. It becomes a feeding frenzy, which in some ways is more the directive than the actual subject matter of what they're watching. It's not that we're gathered today to watch this event, this negative event, wherever that may be. Is we're gathered today because we need to feast at the banquet. And it should also be noted, next point, that this addiction and this sort of unhealthy kind of stuff that we're describing here doesn't have to necessarily be with negative videos. You could easily binge watch too much TV. You can easily binge watch too much psychological videos, like I do. But you want to be looking at the impact and what it's doing. You kind of become what you're exposed to. So it's like, no wonder I talk a lot about psychology. Why do you think? Because I expose myself to a lot of psychological videos. So if you watch a lot of negative or a lot of hateful or whatever, it starts to, and you've got poor boundaries, it starts to bleed into you. And the other sort of difference in terms of if you're binge watching, say, something like psychological videos, documentaries or whatever, is the sort of the beneficial aspect. It's with the self-help, we'll use that one as an example, because the difference between watching, say, self-help and negative, a big difference is the responsibility element. You watch a lot of self-help videos, well, now you've got the burden of responsibility to sort of like do something about that. But if you're watching negative videos, that's like entertainment, you've got no responsibility in there. So it's air quotes safe media to be watching. And so just generally, pretty much closing it up now, guys. So generally just be a bit more mindful and careful of what you're doing. Slow down and take time to think. You need to be applying information and putting it towards an understanding in order to have improvements, really. If you're not really making any progress, you need to be asking yourself, well, what are you doing? If indeed your intention is to just like, I just want to switch off and vegetate and have some entertainment, have some giggles, then at least you know why you're doing it. Because if you're not careful, you could start to place things that will start to loom over you. You'll be in the shadow of some of this stuff. You know, and after you've watched whatever it is you've been watching or binge watching, have a little checking in with yourself. Like, how do you feel afterwards? Did it make you feel any better, or do you feel sort of somewhat empty and meaningless? You know, and that will also help indicate to you, well, where therefore is the where was the benefit in what I watched? It made me feel worse afterwards. You know. Um, and another sort of question you could ask afterwards is, so what does this mean for me? And now that I have some understanding of whatever was being viewed, what am I going to do with it? You know, what am I going to do about it? And you could also perhaps say, like, is there something a bit better that I should be watching, or a bit more appropriate? Like, let's say you want some entertainment. You know, you could be like, well, aren't there some other forms of entertainment I could be watching? Maybe a comedy, maybe a movie, maybe something a bit lighter. Does it have to be this in particular? Um, and be wary that, have some acknowledgement, like where am I in terms of mental health? Because if I'm seeing it, because if I'm unstable, or I've been through a lot of trauma, or I've got some issues, and you might not know what they are exactly. You, you, with a bit of deduction, you might be able to sort of surmise, like, well, I might not be the best of judges then. Like, I might not necessarily know what's good for me. I might be seeing things with a distortion, or I might not be fully aware of what I'm doing. And so you can then be like, well, okay, I'm gonna have to be a bit more careful then, because this stuff, if I'm reckless with it, if I'm careless with it, it could basically fuck me up even more, and then you'll start having things like a existential crisis, or some other kind of issues going on. So I know we can all sort of think like, yeah, because you become desensitized to it. So you think, it ain't going to do much harm or whatever. I'll just watch one more. But you'll be amazed how influenced people are. And that's even with good boundaries and good mental health, So protect your mind at all costs. And I'll leave it there. I see bullets has snuck in right at the end. So I hope that's of some use. I'm sure there'll be some other points. Yeah, I don't really have anything more else to add. If we can increase our awarenesses and be a bit more diligent and attentive to things. I'm not saying it's going to change overnight, but you start putting these things into place, and you practice on it, and you have a good intention, and you are trying, you're willing, you want to put an effort in, and then slow and steady is nothing wrong with that. Is a good way. And like all things, balance and moderation, So thank you all for coming, and I'll see you again soon.